Hello, this is another installment of Economics with Tully, and we're continuing in our sports economics series. Today we're going to be looking at the league structure of Major League Soccer. And very often reporters and writers will refer to the big four professional sports leagues in the United States: baseball, football, basketball, and hockey. I am pretty much insisting that we begin to look at the big five, because soccer has now earned itself a place among professional sports in the United States. It's the youngest. It's the youngest of the professional sports leagues. The MLS was only formed in 1993. So we're talking about an organization that is barely 20 years old at this point. And for many Americans, soccer is a non-American sport. It is a European or Latin American sport. It's an imported sport, and it's different. And a lot of the rules are different, and even sometimes considered strange by American standards. And that has been that's contributed a little bit towards some of the difficulties of the league getting off the ground. But a lot of the difficulties can also be attributed to basic issues of economics, of revenue. Now, the other four professional sports leagues, they are legally organized as franchises. Although, as we've seen from looking at my previous videos and looking at previous readings that I've assigned, some of those leagues are very owner-centric. For instance, Major League Baseball is very owner-centric. Even though they're franchises, the owners still have a great deal of say in what goes on. The mindset of the owners is that this is my team and this is my business. And baseball has been the most reluctant to engage in revenue sharing to help out other teams. One could make the argument that hockey is also fairly owner-centric when it comes to the spectrum on which they lie. Whereas the NFL is a very good example of a well-oiled, well-functioning franchise situation where you have shared responsibility and authority between the league and the teams. And everyone understands that it's a single large company and a rising tide floats all ships. And it's just a better relationship between that shared power, that shared authority between the league and the teams, with the NFL having all the media contracts and dividing those equally among everybody, and the individual teams sharing gate receipts, but only with the visiting team. When it comes to soccer, even though we talk about franchises, local franchises, really is not legally organized as a franchise organization whatsoever. It's another one of the things that makes soccer in this country different. Soccer was organized, MLS was organized in 1993. The first games played in 1996, the first season. But it was legally organized as a single entity corporation. That means all of the teams and the entire league is a single corporation. And as we looked at the different structures of the different leagues, if there is one league that is truly a top-down corporate enterprise, the MLS is, not only in appearance and in how it acts, but in its actual legal formation. Unlike other sports, where an owner purchases their franchise, and you know from our study of franchises that a franchise is your business, but you're using your franchisor's name and marketing and goodwill, and you have to kind of do things their way, but in return it's your business and your profit. In soccer, what happens is, instead of you buying a franchise, you become an investor in Major League Soccer. You actually put money in and invest in the league. Once you put money into the league and you express your desire to manage a team, you are called an investor operator. Now, the sports writers will say the owner. They'll say the owner of the team because it's shorthand and it's easy. But that's really not what they are. They are investors in the league who are given a contract, given the right to operate a particular team. And in the early days of MLS, if you were an investor in the MLS, you actually probably operated more than one team. You may have operated 3 or 4 or as many as 6 teams as an investor. And again, it's because, think of a corporate chain store, where someone might be the manager of 6 or 7 different stores in one region. That's actually how MLS was started. It also means that if you're a bad manager, in a non-sport setting, in a corporate chain, if you're a poor manager, you can be fired. Well, it's very much the same thing in soccer, the way it's set up. It's not as if you have your business, your franchise. Major League Soccer offers you a contract to manage or to operate a team, and they can choose to end your contract early and buy you out and take that team back if they feel like you are not operating the best interest of the league, which is the company or the corporation. And actually, before this video is over, we're going to look at one instance where they have done that in 2014. Now, going back to the early years, and again, the early years were only 20 years ago. Soccer got a real rough, rocky start in the United States. They started with 10 teams, and in the first 5 years of play, they managed to rack up a deficit, a loss of $250 million. It was not good. In the next 4 years, they managed to rack up an additional $100 million of losses on top of that. And if you were looking at soccer in the 1990s, it did not look like this was ever going to be an American sport, ever going to be big, ever going to actually take off because of this great loss that they were incurring. And there were a couple of reasons for this. First of all, when Major League Soccer first took off, none of the soccer teams had their own stadiums. They used existing stadiums from other teams in other leagues. And in fact, all of the MLS teams used football stadiums. If you've seen a soccer game in a football stadium versus seeing a soccer game in a soccer-specific stadium, you know that the experience is very different. It is very hard to have a good, intimate soccer experience in an enormous football stadium. And that's what every team did when they started back in the 90s. It made it very hard to sell the sport. In addition, it was a new sport. The first commissioner, Doug Logan, thought that it would be important to Americanize the sport because it was so new and so unique to the United States. So, little things such as the clock. In most American sports that have clocks, because baseball has no clock and the games can go on forever, in American sports that have clocks, you start at the high number and it ticks down to 0. In soccer, it's actually the opposite. You actually start at 0 and the clock goes up towards the 45-minute halftime mark and then the 90-minute end of game mark. They tried to reverse that. And what they ended up doing was it didn't make Americans any happier. It didn't mean a thing to them, but it really annoyed soccer fans who said, no, the clock should move forward, not backwards. That's what soccer around the world does. So efforts to Americanize it didn't work. The football stadiums didn't work. And the fact that the American soccer team took last place in the 1998 World Cup didn't help things either. And it seemed like this, from this rocky start, it simply was not going to grow. At that point, the MLS changed commissioners, and they chose Don Garber, who was an executive in the NFL. And it was a brilliant move on their part, because they took someone who knew how a good franchise and corporation system worked. And he had the experience of what did and did not work in the NFL behind him when he came into soccer. And so immediately, over the course of the next, this past decade, some major changes have been implemented in the MLS, and they've produced big results. For instance, MLS now requires that any soccer team, whether you are existing or an expansion team, a new team about to open, must have its own soccer-specific stadium. By 2008, a majority of MLS teams did have their own stadiums. Right now, every single team in soccer either has their own stadium, is playing in their own stadium, or it's under construction, with only two exceptions. And the two exceptions are a brand new expansion club in New York, the New York City Football Club, which is actually having a devil of a time finding a place to practice, much less a place to play. But MLS wants a team in New York so badly that they're giving them the chance to figure out how they're going to work this out. And the New England Revolution, which plays in a football stadium, in Gillette Stadium. But even the New England Revolution has been looking for alternative venues, and the city of Providence, Rhode Island is particularly interested in seeing if they can't move the Revolution to Rhode Island, and giving them their own stadium there. So with those two exceptions, every single soccer club now has their own stadium. And as you know, stadium revenues are an important source of revenue and therefore profit for individual clubs. So if this league has been losing millions, hundreds of millions of dollars over its existence, one of the ways to reverse that is to make sure that the clubs have a good source of revenue. And that source of revenue is going to be having their own stadium instead of paying rent to someone else's stadium. Another change that came about is that the MLS decided that one owner-operator cannot play with 4 or 5 different teams. That's just not going to happen. And they have reduced that so that a single owner-operator is allowed to have a single team in the game. Kind of like the one-man, one-vote principle. One investor, one team principle, which makes more sense and most people see as being a lot more fair because one owner's not playing one of his teams against another. Regional rivalries have been established, and they've kind of taken off. Probably the best known one being what's called the Cascadia Cup in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascadia Cup is a rivalry between the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Seattle Sounders, and the Portland Timbers. It's probably the most passionate rivalry of all the soccer teams in the United States, and it brings fans to games. It increases gate receipts. At this point, with a single exception, and that's Chivas, and we're going to talk more about Chivas in this video, soccer has managed to fill their stadiums to 80% capacity for the season. Every team across the board throughout the season has been able to get an 80% capacity, which, if you recall, is one of the guidelines that hockey was using in order to qualify for revenue sharing. Well, this is something that the MLS teams have been able to do naturally. So we have these regional rivalries, we have the new one operator rule, we have the fact that every soccer team now must have its own stadium. We've been seeing name players be brought in from Australia, from Europe, from Latin America, to add visibility and excitement to the American soccer experience. David Beckham being one of the first, one of the earliest, and one of the most well-known names. Tim Cahill from Australia being another one. So, most of the other major sports, because the league is interested in media generation, media broadcast rights, and get a lot of revenue in that way, soccer has done the same thing. And in fact, in 2014, the Major League Soccer signed I believe it's 5-year, $90 million contract with Fox Sports, ESPN, and Univision to broadcast all of the MLS games in the United States. National contracts, that money will be available to all of the teams nationally, just like the NFL and other leagues. And that $90 million per year is 5 times what the previous contract was. This is a major, major jump, and it's been a major catch for MLS. And one of the reasons that propelled a nice contract like that was the interest that Americans showed in the World Cup. Americans showed great interest. There was a lot of TV viewership of the recent World Cup games, and it helped propel the notion that Americans are now interested in soccer. And what's interesting is that when you look at the demographics behind this, it's young people, it's young adults and youth in school who are the most interested in soccer, whereas other sports, such as baseball, actually have the highest average age in terms of their fan base. We're looking at the aging of one group of fans, and we're looking at a new, younger crop of fans that's embracing soccer. And in fact, the media love the 18 to 45-year-old male age bracket. It's one of the ones where they can sell the highest advertising, and that particular demographic has embraced soccer. In addition to the media, you have the excitement that's caused by supporters clubs, which are unique to soccer. Last time I went to a baseball game, it was kind of regulated. They checked to make sure I had nothing in the backpack, nothing in the bag coming in that was going to be a problem. If you made too much noise, if you were too loud, if you screamed too loud, the security actually came over and let you know you were bothering people, even if you weren't. Had to keep, this was Citi Field in New York. Both Citi Field and Yankee Stadium require, even in 100-degree heat, that guys keep their shirts on. It's become much more of a corporate professional approach to the sporting experience. Not so in soccer. In soccer, each club has a supporters club, and you pay to join it. And there's a special section of seats in every stadium for the supporters clubs. You don't have assigned seats. It's pretty much general admission in those areas because you don't sit down anyway. And these supporters stand and scream and yell and chant and sing and wave flags and set off smoke bombs and have confetti that goes onto the field. Now, throw something on the field in a football or a baseball game and you'll be out. This is normal in soccer around the world and in the United States. They have drums. They have musical instruments. It's a non-stop fan experience. It's something that is new to the American sports fan mindset, and a lot of people like it. Some don't, but a lot of people do because it's something unique. And of course, this is still a corporate structure, and that means that players are not signing contracts with individual teams. A player does not sign a contract with the New York Red Bulls or the Dallas Football Club or the LA Galaxy. They sign with the league. It is a corporation that's run from the top down. The corporation signs the contracts. The corporation also sets the salary caps. Everything is done at the top, which has also enabled them to contain costs. And some players took that approach to court, and Major League Soccer won that court case. It's a single corporation. They have the right to control that from the top. So, how has this all changed soccer in the last decade? Well, from the years 2006 to 2009, which was not all that long ago, when you think about it, 2 or 3 clubs actually turned a profit. In the year 2012, 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, from when I'm making this video, 10 of the 19 clubs turned a profit and 2 more broke even. Average attendance at Major League Soccer games, per game attendance, now exceeds per game attendance at NBA games and NHL games. Soccer has made it. It was helped by the World Cup. It was helped by media contracts. It was helped by some of these regional rivalries. It was helped by the fact that the soccer clubs now own their own stadiums and have their own revenue streams. And by doing so, they have become the 5th major professional sport league in the United States. So that doesn't mean everything is rosy. And in fact, I mentioned to you that we would come back and talk about what's recently happened to one club called Chivas USA. And I think it's instructive to do a comparison here between what happened this year in the NBA with Donald Sterling versus what happened in the MSL with Chivas, because they're actually very similar storylines. The NBA had a big public relations problem because the NBA's fan base is heavily urban, heavily minority. Many of their players are minority members. And Donald Sterling was the owner of the Clippers, was caught or was revealed making racist statements. And you can go back and read all about that. This was in the news almost every day. And the question became, how can the NBA get rid of Donald Sterling? And it was very, very difficult because in a traditional franchise situation, he owns his business. And there was a lot of legal wrangling and a lot of suits and threatened suits back and forth as to what the NBA had the power to do. Before it was finally resolved, if it is in fact finally resolved, one of the only approaches the NBA had was to let Donald Sterling keep his team, but to exclude the team from NBA games, which would have rendered his team worthless. But it still was his business. Now, at the same time that's going on in the NBA, there was a similar situation going on in the MSL that not many people heard about. One of the poorest performing teams, in fact, the poorest performing team in Major League Soccer, I said MSL, I meant MLS, in Major League Soccer is Chivas USA. And Chivas USA was actually a team that was owned by some Mexican businessmen. It was actually seen as kind of a daughter team of a team in Guadalajara. And by the year 2012, Jorge Vergara, who is a Mexican billionaire, bought out his partners and became the sole owner-operator of Chivas USA. And he immediately upon becoming the sole owner-operator of this club, he made statements to the press that he was going to return this club to its Mexican roots. Now, this is a club who was playing in the Los Angeles area, had a very large Hispanic fan base. He was going to return this club to its Mexican roots, and he started bringing players into the team who were Mexican, even if they weren't as good as some of the existing players who had been on the roster. And then he started firing employees of Chivas who were not Mexican or who did not speak Spanish. And was actually quoted as making racist comments, just like Donald Sterling, about if you don't speak Spanish, go play for the Galaxy or go work for the Galaxy, the other LA team. And even saying, going further and saying that, if you speak Chinese, that's not even a language. In May of 2013, Dan Kalishman and Ted Chronopoulos, who were academy coaches for Chivas, had been fired by Vergara, and they sued over racial discrimination. They said the only reason we were fired is not because we did our jobs poorly, but because we weren't the right ethnicity. And this is what Vergara said he was going to do. That was in May 2013. Before the end of that year, August 2013, the HR director, the human resources director of Chivas, who would know who's getting fired and why, was herself fired, Cynthia Craig. She turned around and sued Vergara and Chivas for racial discrimination. So the Major League Soccer had a similar situation of this racial discrimination and this intolerance going on within their league, just like the NBA had going on within their league. But because Major League Soccer is a top-down corporation where managers can be fired, it was very easy to resolve. In fact, Major League Soccer met with Vergara, told him, "You're relieved of duty. We are buying out the remainder of your contract," because he had a contract to manage Chivas, and gave him the boot. Not only did they end that, by February 2014 it was over, they settled the suits with Kalishman, Chronopoulos, and Cynthia Craig. As a single corporation, they could do that on behalf of Chivas. And they announced that Chivas was going on sabbatical for at least 2 years. Most observers suggest that Chivas as a club is over because the brand image has been hurt. It was a poor performing club, and now they have this additional black mark on their record because of Vergara and what he did to the club. So they simply took the club back from him, closed it down, and said Chivas will not play. At the same time, they announced that there's going to be an expansion club in LA. It'll be a new club in LA, and I suspect the reason they're doing this is because they believe Los Angeles has a large enough soccer market to support 2 different teams. But the Chivas brand has been hurt. It doesn't help Major League Soccer. It doesn't help the corporation. So they're retiring Chivas, but they are going to bring immediately, fairly quickly, a new team along with a new owner-operator with a new name to take their place. Because they operate as a corporate structure, they were able to be very nimble and move very quickly. And a situation that was just as bad as the Donald Sterling situation in the NBA was contained and dealt with before it became a media circus, which is exactly what happened in the NBA. So, soccer continues to expand. The end of Chivas being the only ending of a club in the last few years. There are new clubs forming in New York City, a second club in New York City to be a rival to the Red Bulls, who play in Harrison, New Jersey. A new club in Orlando. A new club is being organized in Atlanta. David Beckham is attempting to organize a new club in Miami, which again would create that regional rivalry cluster, Atlanta, Orlando, Miami, but he's having a hard time finding a place to build a new stadium. And the MLS rule is, if you're going to be an MLS club, you're going to have your own stadium and stand on your own 2 feet. Beckham has put forth 3 different proposals to Miami and Miami-Dade city and county. All 3 have been rejected. Whether he gets it or not is yet to be seen. As of the time of this video, he still does not have a location or a stadium, but MLS wants to grant him an expansion franchise. Other cities are asking for expansion franchises. San Antonio is asking for a franchise. That's one of them, among many. So, the newest kid on the block, MLS, for half of its existence so far, there was real concern as to whether or not they were really going to make it. Could they break into the American market? It may be that the stars have lined up. The interest in the World Cup, the securing of a big media deal, the ability of these clubs to build their own soccer stadiums, which are not as fancy and expansive and as enclosed as football stadiums. They're a little more open air, but they create stadium revenues for the club. The ability of the MLS to move quickly, to make decisions and impose them on the entire league because it's a top-down corporate chain. All of these things have worked together to suggest that MLS is here to stay. So that's Tom Simmons with a really quick overview of state of MLS today, and I look forward to our next lecture together. See ya.